Hey, James, how are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Where are you?
St. Helena.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we have
Nice.
offices throughout the valley. This one is um, our newest office, and it's in the same building as ETS.
Oh, sure, yeah. And then you had a an excellent harvest. What I hear from a lot of people.
Yeah, it was. The quality was really, really exactly what we like to see for the style of wines that we make. We were able to harvest with really full flavor, great phenolics, a great phenolic maturity, but great acid, and in the bricks were not too high. So for us, it's like a dream. The yields were in some cases, especially up in the mountains, excruciatingly low. I mean, our
Hmm.
eight grade, we averaged 1 ton an acre for that ranch. It's a very large
Wow.
ranch. Down on the valley floor and some of the fertile benchlands, um, we were down maybe about 20-25% due to the droughts. But in the mountains, we got hit the hardest.
I hear that also the berries were very small with thick skin, so
Yeah,
lots
a
of
lot of that
tannin.
has to do with it's a number of things. One, if you were doing drought irrigation, you're not watering too early in the season. Your berries were small and concentrated.
Mhm.
But for those who are a little more ambitious with irrigation, you may have not had that. Um, but typically, most people try to wait closer to veraison to use much water, as do we. So you did have those small concentrated berries. But again, if you can balance that with proper acid and not too much alcohol, it becomes a really beautiful, dense, flavorful classical wine. You have to be careful if your
Wonderful.
prices go up too much, then you have a wine that may be a bit too saturated. And that's the delicate dance. And when you have such small yields and small berries, it's very easy for the bricks to go out of check really fast. So you have to be sampling daily. And I know that seems extreme, but you really have to know where things are going so it doesn't go out of whack. Because your bricks can, especially on poor soils in the mountains, they can shoot up within 48 hours with a heat wave. Um,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, when you have a bigger crop, it's the bricks go up much slower.
Sure, it makes sense. Yeah, because
Yeah,
you have less liquid in the grape, so
correct.
it's going to pop, pretty quickly. So, and that's really good news, particularly after the 2020, and obviously you had a big problem there with Burgess, but just thinking about in general, it's pretty amazing what you've done. The Lawrence family and the whole thing, and I've read a few things, and they haven't really, not many stories have mentioned like why they did it. Like, I assume they're really into wine because the wine business can be a tough business. But yeah, what's the story? Like, why did they decide after being involved in all sorts of other agricultural products? Like, what was one day they just set out and in a quick time, they've really put together some amazing classical, let's say, historical names, and then have done some other things. What's the story with the
So
Lawrences?
I met Galen and his family back in, I believe it was 2017, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Uh, and we really hit it off. And our connection was really as, sommelier and wine collector, and,
Yeah.
making some of the great wines of the world. And that's how our relationship sort of grew, was from that, for just sort of a mutual love for really, really great classical wines. The first night we met, I mean, I still remember the wines we had: 82 Latour, 90 Petrus, 97 Mascarello.
Oh,
I think it was 2010 DRC Grenache. I mean, just really great classical wines,
yeah.
um, and we got along on a personal level very well. And maybe roughly 6 months in, we started talking. He says, what's the business of wine? What is it? We started talking. And I said, well, there's a lot of ways you can enter the business. There's many. And his daughter lived here in the Napa Valley. She just graduated from CIA and decided to stay here. So he was coming here more often. And he really liked the more classical structured wines of Napa.
Mm.
And, you know, we talked, and he says, are there investment opportunities? He says, absolutely. But as we discussed, I said, they have to be long-term investments. It doesn't really pan out for short-term investment unless you really want to, that's a whole different business model, but
Yeah.
he's not that kind of guy. So when Heitz, there became whispers of Heitz going on the market. He gave me a call and asked me what I thought. And I actually flew down to Wilson, Arkansas, where he has a home. And we spent a few days down there, drinking more great wine and talking about what I loved about Heitz. And he said, well, you know what? I feel very confident. I believe you. He goes, I love the wines. He goes, I'm going to do this. And he called me a few years later, probably a few months later, and said, hey, look, I'm going to close on this thing. I'm going to buy it. Thank you for your advice. I'd love you to come out and we'll celebrate this thing in Napa. So I said, sure, I'm not going to turn you down there. So I flew in. I was living in Aspen at the time, and I flew in from Aspen to Napa, and we just spent a few days, drinking great wines. And that was my first time being to Heitz, and it just felt really exceptional being there. You feel the impact of 100+ harvests from that estate.
Yeah,
The
I
estate
agree.
Taplin was developed in the 1880s by the Rossi family. They still have one of the original stone wineries, and it was built in 1898. And you can just feel that history there, and it's really beautiful, not being like this big flashy winery. It's very
Totally.
cool. And
Yeah, I agree.
at the end of it, we're flying back, and he says, Carlton, he says, so what do I have to do to get you to come on and run this thing? And I said, Gail, I don't
That's awesome.
yeah. I said,
What a
Gail,
story.
yeah, I said, I don't run wineries, but thank you. And he says, why not? I says, well, and I actually made him a whole list of things I didn't know how to do, which I think
That's
really
so
surprised
cool.
and caught him off guard. But I respect him a lot. I wasn't gonna be dishonest, very honest with him.
Yeah.
And he went through and he says, well, you're a very smart guy. You're a quick learner. I feel all those things you can learn very quickly. So if you want the job, I'd love you to come and join. And I mulled around a little bit, and we went back and forth for a couple months. But finally, I said, you know what? I think this is a really could be a really beautiful new chapter in my life, and an exciting new challenge. I've been at the Little Nell for almost 9 years. I was the wine
Yeah.
director at that time, and so I came on board. And when I came on board, we really quickly, even though I'd only been at Heitz for maybe 4 months at that point, started to talk about if there were other investment potential, if there are any other states that we felt um, that could use the same attention, classical estates that had sort of fallen out of favor and just sort of decided not to, not be forward facing, and whose wines that we really liked. So we continue to invest with that as a priority.
Yeah.
Uh,
Such
and
as, and then Stony Hill
Stony Hill,
and
Burgess,
Burgess. Yeah.
but also
That's
some
so.
incredible vineyards, James.
Mhm,
I became a student of history of Napa Valley, and
mhm.
I mean, this, there are a lot of wines in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even some in the 80s that were never a single vineyard designated. And it just
Yeah,
wasn't
of
part of the
course.
culture for a long time. So you sort of have to do some research, ask some old timers, and find out where were those wines sourced. And, we found out I love the old wines from Spring Mountain Estate. And I
Me
found
too.
out from John Williams that those wines he actually made in the 80s, they came from the Wildwood Ranch in Rutherford. And lo and behold, that came up for sale. So we bought that. And now we have that whole original Wildwood estate, 110 acres. We own the entire ranch now.
That is awesome. And so I guess the question is define classical Napa Valley. I mean, this is sort of a rhetorical question, by the way,
Sure, sure.
but
Yeah,
just
yeah,
because I'm a huge fan myself.
yeah. I mean, it's like, so I'm a lover of great artwork. And when you look at art, you can define a movement by an era and the artist, sort of thing. When you talk about the Cubist movement, this very particular period where that style was in favor. And what I look at is really looking at the sort of late 60s to mid 80s. There
Mhm.
was a very particular era in Napa where wines were, they had a very particular structure to them. Wines that were typically ranging somewhere between 12 to high 13s in alcohol, really never going above that. usually not much above 13.5. A focus on acid and a lighter extraction, often using larger wood instead of all barrique, and definitely not
Hmm.
all barrique. Um, and really focus on that. With farming, really the focus in the emphasis was on a bit more shading. So the classical Napa sprawl, the double Geneva curtain, and the Elkhorn were preferred over vertical shoot positioning, which allows you to get dappled sunlight without too much sunlight. I mean, it's just sort of, it's all very intentional the way it was farmed. Wider rows, spacing the
Yeah,
rows,
totally. Yeah,
and
low density.
yeah. And don't get me wrong, I actually do like modern Napa wines as well. There's a number of
Mm.
producers that I really have collected for a number of years and really enjoy. But we just had a special place in our heart for that style of wine, and we particularly like them with a number of years of age as well. So, that's what I would say is sort of more of the classical style, in Napa that we were really trying to, find young winemakers who were really nostalgic about it and wanted to go down that rabbit hole, and go on that journey with them. It's
Well, I'm sure, as you know, what I found interesting was the number of young winemakers. Well, anyways, I'm pretty old now, so just about everyone's young. But in any case, let's say guys in their 30s, and I spent some time like hanging with them, like at some of the at dinners with like there's like 10 or 20 of them, and they're always drinking old Napa wines. And I'm
yeah.
just like, dude, it's like, what's the deal here? And always drinking Italian wines and champagne. And I said, well, why aren't you making wines like that? And luckily, in the last 5 or 6 years, you've really seen
Mm,
people, changing it. Like now that Screaming Eagle picks in late August,
yeah.
or even Harlan,
Mhm.
or so you see that trend of top estates and top producers doing exactly what what you say and exactly what you want to do. That's great to want to do that, but with global warming and these issues with drought, snow, water, it must be really hard to dial it in like that.
Well, I think
To
you ultimately you have to always be looking to adjust your approach for the season, your climate, and ultimately we started by looking at what they were doing. You have to start with the raw
Mhm.
material. Let's start there. It all starts in the vineyard with ensuring you can get, because look, anyone can pick grapes early, but can you pick grapes that have enough phenolic ripeness and flavor maturity, to make great wine, right? Is really the goal.
Yeah,
And understanding how to balance your vineyard so that you don't have these extremely green pyrazine driven wines that have crazy hard tannins, and you really want, and that's a difficult thing. To do that, you have to use science. You can't just sort of be a gunslinger. It doesn't work.
yeah.
And so we started with trying to look at what farming techniques were used back in those days. Luckily, we work with Mark Neal, who his family's been farming here since the early 60s. He's developed a lot of his family's developed a lot of the vineyards that we see around the valley at this point. And they've been working with the Heitz family since then, pretty much since they started. So we really understand that. But we also understand that some of those techniques don't work now
Mm.
because the climate has changed. So looking at everything from um, vine training methods. There's a lot of the valley where VSP just probably shouldn't be planted anymore.
Yeah.
You really need to be looking at how to shade your fruit a bit more and cool down the fruiting zone. It has a massive impact on the in structure of the wines. Also looking at what yields you should be having. I think there was this really big push to have as low as yields as possible, where it doesn't really make sense scientifically on valley floor with more fertile soils. I love listening to the story of Tim Mondavi talking about 10-ton Tony from the Tokalon vineyard that would get 10 tons. And that's because there are certain parts of that vineyard that are very fertile. So why would you try to have 2-3 tons to the acre? Ultimately, what happens is you've got so much vigor and moisture in the soil, your canopy stay in a vegetative state. So you're always going to have pyrazines. And you end up with these
Yeah.
wines that are 16% alcohol, but with pyrazines. And that is a sign of a very out of balance vineyard. So really understanding how to farm to to not have pyrazines at lower bricks and not having to hang the fruit indefinitely. But also understanding even the clones that you need to have there, the vine spacing, how much fruit that you can actually ripen properly and not try to push it. Because obviously we know in the 90s there's this big push. How much could I get? There was a lot of grape growers said, how much
Yeah.
tonnage could I get? Because it was, they weren't making wine. Now there's a lot more people who are landowners who are now making wine. So
Good
the
point.
interest is more in making quality wine instead of just, it's sort of what happened in Chianti, right? Where it was just,
Yeah.
I'll pay on tonnage, not quality. Now you're making wine, your interest is, it's far more driven towards quality. And just also understanding how to work with fruit like that. One of the reasons why we hired a lot of the winemakers that we hired is they know how to make great wines at lower bricks. You can't vinify the wines the same way. It doesn't work.
Totally.
It's just like cooking. If I give you 2 tomatoes at different levels of ripeness, if I tell you I want really good tomato sauce, you have to cook them differently. And in the cellar, you can't take fruit at, we're harvesting Cabernet, at 22 bricks, 23 bricks.
Wow.
You're not 21 bricks in some cases. You're not vinifying the
That's
wine.
really that's like 1980s. Like
Yeah.
when I left the US in 85 for Europe to live there.
Yeah.
And I remember with, refractometers, and it was all like 21, 21.5. And then I came back to like 15 years later, it's like 27. Like, what happened? Where have I been? It was like, I'd been on another planet or something.
No, and I think, you have to remember, it's like, you can't make those wines the same way. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And, I've had some really in-depth conversations with our winemakers who are used to working with cool climate varietals. I mean, I have winemakers who never made Cabernet before, only made Pinot. And watching them
cool.
with Cabernet, it's just mind-blowing. They are looking for something different in the wine. They know they're going to get structure. It's Cabernet, but they're looking for aromatic complexity. They're looking for freshness, knowing that you're going to have the structure from Cabernet no matter what. Also, élevage and the way they age the wines is very different. And it's just been a really beautiful journey in trying to say, hey, look, we like the results, but we know that we have to go a different way because our climate and weather is very different. So what do we need to tweak naturally to get there? I should also note that, all of our winemakers are very focused on biodynamic and regenerative farming,
Awesome.
which is, another big part of, I think, being able to deal with things like drought conditions is having a balanced vineyard that can withstand those conditions. It's very, very important for us. So we'll be fully biodynamic within a year, Demeter certified. We have
fantastic. Good.
Yeah, we have 650 planted acres in the Napa Valley right now.
That means that actually the Heitz had started this already, because it takes what is it, 6 or 7 years to get to meter, to get to meter certified, right?
Heitz was quietly one of the biggest advocates for organic farming, and they've been organic certified since 1984, the year I was born. So they've been doing this for a long time. And I didn't know that. I think they were doing it in a day where it was sort of still looked upon as like witchcraft, organic farming. And so they didn't tell anyone about it. They refused to put it on the label. They didn't put any marketing materials. So we took that and ran with it and said, how do we continue that legacy of being at the forefront of that movement? Although we're definitely very far from being the first people to go biodynamic, we'll be probably the largest for sure in the US. So
congratulations. Yeah. That's incredible. What do you think about the market? Again, this is sort of rhetorical, but is the market ready? Are there, is it new consumers, or do you see older Napa Cabernet lovers okay with drinking wines with lower alcohol, less fruit driven, more terroir driven? What's your thought on that, on the market? Obviously, you believe there's a market, or you wouldn't be doing this, because you and the Lawrences can only drink so much wine on your own.
We try, but no, the way I look at it, and I come from the sommelier side of interacting with guests, and I feel very strongly there's more than enough guests and wine consumers in the market that would love the Stella wine. Now, remember, we're talking about Napa here. This is not Volnay. You can only make so light of a wine. You're making Cabernet Sauvignon in the Napa Valley, right? So we're not talking about 11% alcohol red wines here.
Yeah.
We're just talking about wines that have a little bit more of an emphasis on freshness and vibrance and ageability and structure than power. power is very easy to attain with Cabernet Sauvignon in the Napa Valley. It's about, can you restrain it and keep it balanced is really the chore. But also, you know, wine consumers are open to that balance and elegance from every other region in the world, then they have to allow us to do it as well and celebrate it here. And I think there's enough people outside of the world, I mean, all over the world, even outside of the U.S., that would really embrace that style of wine. We know there's a big market in the UK who loves that style of wine. In
Yeah.
Japan, they absolutely adore that style of wine. I mean, there's enough markets who really love it. And we also have to remember the Napa Valley is not a massive growing region. It's 45,000 acres, and the lion's share that is consumed domestically. So we also need to be looking at is how do we spread our wings internationally a little bit more. And I think they will embrace the wines even more so, being a little more elegant, a little more fresh.
Yeah, I have to agree. As you know, I've lived in Asia like 10 years, and I can say that, yeah, drinkability is really important. I mean, the fact is, people like to drink wine here. They're not into one glass wines.
Yeah, I'm not
And
either.
yeah,
And I
and so I
like,
think that, mhm,
I'm an eater, huh? First, right? I was a cook
yeah,
for a number of years. I love to eat great food, and I think if I'm going to have a bottle of wine, which I want more than a glass for sure, is I want wine that refreshes the palate and doesn't weigh it down and doesn't challenge my food, and complements it well, but also can develop over a number of hours and still remain fresh, and doesn't lean towards the sort of syrupy, unctuous side.
yeah.
And I'm also, I wouldn't say I'm a lightweight, but I think sometimes when wines get too heavy, especially with alcohol,
It's,
it's like it shortens my night a bit. You know what I mean?
sure,
It's a little more difficult.
and it's hell in the morning too.
Oh my God.
Yes, that's
We're getting
like,
old, James. I can't do it anymore.
yeah, totally. I'm with you. It's really exciting what you're doing. Congratulations. I like the whole serendipity of the whole thing. I can just see the dots. They were all there, and somehow you sort of connected them all.
Well, and that's what it is there is no, I think you look at what we've accomplished in the last 2.5 years, and you would think that there was this big boardroom with a bunch of corporate guys with this plan. And there
Yeah.
really, it was really about staying pure in our beliefs and what we wanted to achieve. And probably the most important part is finding the right estate directors and winemakers who also wanted that, but didn't have anyone that would invest in allowing them to do that on a grand stage. And we brought winemakers from all over to really take part in it. We brought in Jamie Motley to take over at Stony Hill, and she's just a really brilliant winemaker. We're really fortunate to retain Brittany Sherwood, a really talented young winemaker. Matt Taylor, who was at Joseph Swan, Domaine Dujac, and then worked with at the Isley Vineyard for a number of years. He took over, and then
Okay. Yeah.
Nico Cuevo, formerly of Costa Brown, to come in and make the wines at Heitz. So we've
Oh,
got
he's
all,
cool.
yeah, they're great winemakers, and they all have
What?
different.
Which? Where's Nico working then?
He's making the wines. He's doing two projects for us, actually. He's making
Uh-huh.
the wine down at the Haynes Vineyard, and another experimental project, a collaboration with a very well-known Burgundian producer, which we'll announce soon, on a
Okay.
project. So, um,
Wow. Cool.
yeah,
So,
we're having.
are those? Is Nico doing Cab and Pinot, or just what is he doing?
Yeah, he's doing both, because at the Haynes Vineyard we have Chardonnay and Pinot Noir
Yeah.
from 1967. There's Syrah there, also Cabernet, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Mourvèdre. And then in Rutherford, it's 100% Cabernet based wines.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, watch this space, as they used to say.
Yeah,
Lots to, lots to
I
see
mean,
going on.
it just feels so good. You go around and you taste these wines, and they're just so delicious. It's just really nice. It's very gratifying. It's my job again to put the pieces together, but ultimately, the credit is always due to our winemakers. I think that I come from a restaurant background where I
Yeah.
strongly believe that the chef is the soul of the house. I believe that with our winemakers, they're the ones who are charged with crafting what we present to our guests.
It's really, like you said, 2.5 years, just this lightning pace of, and now what is it going to feel like when you can't, it's going to take time to really make make really great wines. And this is agriculture. So like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we what we do is we isolated things that we can speed up and things that we can't. Um, You can't speed up vineyard, you can't speed up
Yeah.
which wines age. Everything else we is under our control. So it does take time, but we're in it for the very long haul, and it's part of our journey. Galen and I together, and it's been very gratifying. But we learn an enormous amount every day. We're fortunate to have vineyards in all stretches of the valley, so we're able to just learn an enormous amount because of everything that we have going on in so many different winemakers. But even, we came on in 18, and really our first harvest was 19, and we've learned so much from that. 2020, we harvested about 20% roughly before the fires, and then we left the rest
Mhm.
on. So that was a different kind of lesson. But we also did make a very small quantity of really, really exceptional wine. That was the first year that we really had our heads completely wrapped around how to farm for lower bricks in this climate, and knowing which blocks we could do it and which blocks we couldn't.
Interesting.
And in 2021, this year, although again the yields were low, it was really a complete picture of coming full circle and going around. And, again, now we have estates all over, tasting with everyone. It's sort of like the head nod, like, all right, we're in the right direction. We know what we're doing here. And it's just staying consistent, continuing to learn, and moving forward appropriately. I think one of the issues that a lot of investment groups have when they get so big is they try to have this big universal approach, and it doesn't work. We take every vineyard by itself as almost if we only had that one vineyard, and we farm it that way, and we harvest it that way, we make it that way, even though we have so much going on. If you don't give it that detail, then ultimately a number of the vineyards that just fall by the wayside as a sacrifice. We really don't want to do that.
And you're really going to focus on single vineyards then for your top wines, right?
Yeah, in some cases, I mean, really, it's
Okay.
I think that single vineyard is very important. It's where the Napa Valley really needs to go for people to really understand the unique terroirs here. Um, but we also sort of feel that there should be something unique about it, and not every vineyard deserves that.
Yeah,
It's fine for it to have a name, but does it deserve its own bottling? That's up to
totally.
each state. We don't necessarily feel that way. Or Heitz would have probably 30 single vineyards, and we don't really want to do that. That's like a disaster in the cellar. So
That's, yeah. Aside from the fact selling it all would be confusing.